All right, so I think this panel is a little bit overdue for us. I mean, we obviously recognize that this is a global movement, and I think we've got over 60 countries represented here today. But I think so far we've presented mostly a North American perspective of kind of the crypto space. And on this panel, we've got leaders from 4 different projects in different parts of Asia. And it could be argued that Asia is actually the most important region in the world in terms of cryptocurrency, especially on kind of the consumer side. So I'm excited to jump in with you guys and kind of talk about what's going on there. Why don't we start by you guys each discussing briefly what you're working on, and we could start with Zhuling.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Zhuling Chen. It's a great honor to be here, to share our perspectives about Asia. So I'm the co-founder of Aelf, where we're building a new blockchain system that we want to leverage multi-chain structure and also empower our nodes to run on cluster of computers to execute more complicated smart contracts.
Thanks for having me today. My name is Jason Fang. I'm the managing partner of Sora Ventures. We came in from a base in Hong Kong and managing about it's a bit over 100 million AUM right now. Our investment strategy is in Asia. We incubate mostly on the dApp side. Investment cycle is usually less than 6 months. And then in the US, we're mostly on protocols.
Hi everyone, I'm Gordon Chen. So currently I'm working on a project called Neutal, which is a decentralized financial instrument. And also I'm a venture partner at FBG Capital. We've been very active in the past 2 years in the crypto market.
Hi everyone, my name is Vansa. So I'm the managing director of OmiseGo. We're a project based out of Bangkok, and we're essentially building a network that's allowing wallet for payments interoperability.
So what do you guys think is the biggest difference in the crypto landscape where you are versus kind of North America, and what we know here? And maybe we could start with Vansa and being based in Bangkok.
Yeah, so the crypto landscape, I think for us in Bangkok is it's very exciting because we're one of the first essentially bigger name projects coming out of there, right? And so what we're doing is, what we realized is the technical capacity there is still very low, but there's a lot of interest. So we're starting to develop programs where we're inviting local developers to come and hack with us. We're now launching the first Ethereum meetup actually next month. So it's still a very bare landscape in that sense, but there's a lot of excitement. And the government is actually very open to the technology itself as well.
But OmiseGo is domiciled in Singapore, though, still, is that right?
Yeah, so we're registered in Singapore. A lot of the team members sit in Bangkok because our parent company, Omise, has a headquarters in Bangkok. We also find that Singapore is good in terms of setting things up, but also the labor costs and the operating costs there is really high. And it's an easier sell to say, hey, come live in Bangkok, and people move pretty easily there.
Gordon, how about yourself?
Yeah, so actually I spent a lot of time in the United States, and we started from China. Like based on my observations, I think like the community size in Asia, like in terms of like the quantity is much bigger than it is here, right? But like the core community, right, which people focus on more like about technology and talking economics. I think like here we will have better qualities. So I think that's a major difference. And yeah, and a lot of like arbitragers, speculators everywhere. It's a global thing.
So I can probably just speak behalf of the investment side. The reason why we have 2 strategies is because in the US, a lot of the we call legitimate projects are trying to comply with SEC. So it's very likely that as a hedge fund where we have a 6-month lockup period, a lot of these tokens will be what we call 12-month vest as minimum. And that's just to comply with SEC, right? And so that's why we have a model where we put a smaller check size on a lot of the U.S. investment, but our primary focus is we lead a lot of the rounds in Asia. We are very hands-on. We make sure that the token structure is actually kind of like it makes sense for the Asian investor appetite. So basically, whereas in the U.S. a lot of times a lot of investments are long term, right? In Asia, investors prefer a shorter investment cycle, which means that they want fast investments. They want to come in fast. They want to come out fast. They want to recycle the capital a lot faster. And so something that's like more on the protocol side is actually quite hard, but it's quite rare. There's not a lot, but dApps are much easier to incubate. Also because of just an environment, we have in Asia, you have a lot more dynamic legal system. It's with like a business relationship with partners. Things are just a lot easier to get done, and that's just the fact that the culture there is slightly different. So we basically incubate like celebrity entrepreneurs, and then we get them really good investors, not from the government side, from their client side, and then we super undervalue the project so that it does really well in the secondary.
So you mentioned kind of speculation and that really being fueled on the consumer side in many different countries within Asia. Do you see any trends there in terms of, is that heating up? Is it slowing down? Are different governments reacting differently? And it obviously varies within by country, but maybe talk a little bit about that.
So basically, regardless of where we are, actually, I think the industry is still very much based on speculation. Whereas Asia is probably like, their investment strategy is probably facing more towards how I can basically recycle my capital, how can I come in faster and make it like a quick 4 or 5x. And so you definitely see a lot more speculation in Asia. And also just the fact that if you notice, like the top 10 exchanges, a lot of them are Asians, right? But Asians have a general tendency of like to gamble a lot, right? And this is just the fact that it's like a cultural thing. And so obviously for that means that you're going to see a lot more market makers, you're going to see a lot more traders, and you're just going to see a lot more partnership between these traders and exchanges. Like I said, like in Asia, it's just business and relationship matters a lot more. I'm sure in the US too, but you can get things done a lot quicker there. And so that's why I think in Asia, for sure, you'll see a lot more speculation on the secondary. And
I guess relative to like last year, for example, do you think speculation, I imagine, is increasing drastically, but I guess, do you have a view on, is that likely to continue? Is there a lot more there, or are we seeing kind of trends from a regulatory perspective, in places like China or potentially elsewhere that could kind of slow that down? I don't know if you guys have views on kind of where that could be going.
Yeah, like in terms of like technology, we haven't seen any technical breakthrough like recently, right, or at least for a year, right? I can definitely see that, like, the speculation like is getting cooler and cooler, right? Unless we find some like new concept, like some like new blockchains being deployed, like we can see some working blockchain. Mm-hmm. And before that, I think the market is just getting cooler and cooler. Yeah, that's my thinking.
I think the public, the perception that some people have here is that from the consumer side, Asia is really interesting, but maybe from the developer kind of new project side, not as much so. Obviously, I think you would disagree with that because you guys are obviously building interesting projects there. But maybe talk a little bit about that. Do you think there is some truth to that perception, or may that be changing? How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, maybe just to that point, I think on one hand, probably the trading volume in Asia kind of make people do think to that perspective, that, okay, a lot of speculation, a lot of consumer adoption over there. But if you look at underground, actually I do see a lot of entrepreneurs are really working hard on blockchain related business. Although we could argue that exchanges or wallets may not be like fully distributed, but those are also key infrastructures that has to be in place. So those things are happening, of course, definitely in Asia. Or if we look at China or South Korea, actually a lot of entrepreneurs have already jumped into this field. Take Korea, for example. Most of the large companies are actually already using blockchain technology, and the consumer who has already been educated digitally and so comfortable with using digital currency and other services are actually very easy to do the migration. That's why personally I do think from the entrepreneur point of view, a lot of guys who has been educated from the mobile internet era will definitely jump into this field fairly quick.
And you mentioned China, and my sense is that since the Chinese government last year cracked down on cryptocurrencies, there has been kind of a move from some Chinese entrepreneurs to places like Singapore and Japan. Would you say, are you seeing a lot of that? Maybe talk a little bit about that. Are there still serious entrepreneurs that are staying in China, or is it mostly going to other parts of Asia?
Yeah, so our team is mostly based in Singapore and China. So I live in Singapore, so that was a very good observation point, to see. I do see a lot of projects start to go offshore right now, not just Chinese projects, but also from other countries, just to benefit from the regulatory stability in Singapore. Although the Chinese government has issued a restriction last September, I see it more of a protection to the retail investors. However, the government, or at least the society, is still very bullish about new technology. So as long as you stay as a technology company in China, that's completely fine. Although this is kind of like a huge disruption in the Chinese scene, but I also see this brings a good aspect, which is to force Chinese companies to go global. I mean, blockchain, one of the key perspective here is you have to be global, it's borderless. And traditionally, if you are based in China, you are always thinking about your domestic market. That, on your roadmap, it's going to take another 3 to 5 years before you think about going somewhere else. But however, right now, if you look at the exchanges, we look at the projects, from day one, you need to think about how to outreach the other markets. So from that perspective, I think the Chinese business are probably becoming more distributed and more global.
Yeah. Vansa, maybe I know OmiseGo has a really strong community. I'd love to hear is that community truly global? Is it more particular region? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our community is global, but essentially our starting target market is Asia, right? Because our parent company operates there. We know the landscape well. We know the regulators well. So what we're trying to do right now is actually build up capacity actually around Asia. So we recently launched this thing called Neutrino in Tokyo, which is a blockchain co-working space. And that's part of our effort to get entrepreneurs some support. If they need business matching or they just need some sort of guidance, they need us to help them connect to various researchers in our network. We're also launching one in Singapore as well. But I wanted to actually point out that the regulators in Asia is quite interesting, because recently we went to this meeting called APAC. So it's essentially a body that advises the government, right? And what they're pushing now for the government to do is to do a regional sandbox. And I think it makes a lot of sense when you're trying to push essentially blockchain and blockchain solutions, because you can't really just say, okay, we're going to do a Thailand sandbox for fintech. That's not the whole purpose of it. So we do see the government's actually opening up to this kind of regional efforts.
And is APAC kind of a group of countries?
Yeah, so Asia Pacific. So essentially Asia plus, I'm going to screw this up, Australia, New Zealand, and maybe a couple
And
more.
every country in it is participating, or very?
Yeah, so the UN countries.
Okay. Gordon, maybe you could talk a little bit about, from a region perspective. I mean, you've been in China, and you're now starting a new business, kind of as an entrepreneur. How do you weigh staying in China versus being somewhere else?
So like the most important thing for us is trying to hire the most talented guy you can find, right? So you definitely want to go where the talents are, right? Like in my personal experience, like I started like an internet start company back to 2014 in Beijing, right? So I think like Beijing is definitely one of the most energetic and very entrepreneurial cities in Asia, right? And like in the United States, especially like in Bay Area, so you can find all kinds of engineers, right? Because like cryptography is relatively, they're very limited like supplies in this market, right? So you definitely want to, find somebody who can do that. And most of them, I think they are in the United States. So yeah, that's my.
Got it. And Jason, how about yourself in terms of, where you invest globally? Are there particular regions that you spend most of your time?
So, although I am most of my time actually in China, we like to work with projects that's a reverse ICO model, which basically means that it's an equity company and then they want to launch a token. So it means that your incentive is not really to fundraise as much as possible. Your incentive is to try to have essentially invent a token and bring the token model into your existing business so see it more of a strategy, so blockchain as a strategy or token as a strategy. And we did that with Mithril actually. So a few things we look at. Number one is the equity project must be banned in China or just they don't have any operation in China. Number two is they have they're large enough. They have a lot of resources. So whether, for example, Mithril is actually the equity company behind Mithril is 17 Media, which is they're like one of the largest live streaming company in Asia. Number one in Hong Kong, number one in Taiwan, number one in Japan. And they're going IPO this year on New York Stock Exchange. So these are the type of level companies we work with. So we kind of understand, okay, at least in Taiwan, at least in Asia, they have a lot of relationship with government, with existing businesses, with banks. And so we immediately are able to kind of speed up the application layer, where you see a lot of kind of application back in 2015 and 2016, where we did a lot of equity blockchain investment. A lot of startups still had to struggle with getting business partners on board, right? And that's how we speed things up with using a token model and a reverse ICO. And then make sure the operation is banned in China. And then the next project we're working on is on casino gambling. So this is also banned in China. So things that are banned in China, I think, has a lot of advantage of moving forward. You don't have a lot of legal restriction, but more importantly, you're able to leverage a lot of. It just turns out the blockchain and things that are banned in China works really well together.
So, Zhuling and Vansa, I guess you guys both did token sales in the past year or two. And I think you are close to a product launch. Maybe talk a little bit about both your project, but also other interesting projects, that we should be looking out for coming out of Asia.
So our project essentially, we're starting off, target market in Asia, and our goal is that there's financial frictions, right, in Asia that I think we also see globally, but in Asia it might be a lot more stark in that sense. So what we're doing is we're starting to look at partners. We're also looking at building up. You were talking about communities before. Going to different countries like Vietnam is a very interesting one that not a lot of people are actually talking about. And just start to build up the local capacity first to then be able to interact with the essentially the customers, right? Because we're providing a wallet SDK as part of our solutions, and what we need local partners to do is actually implement it themselves, because there's a lot of regulations related with wallets, an e-money wallet license that we can't really be responsible for in every country that we go to. So with that, we come across a lot of really interesting projects. Kyber is one that we work with really closely. There's some privacy protocols that are coming out of Thailand as well. Like Zcoin is also a really interesting one. We're also talking to stablecoins, because in terms of payments, that's what we need. And someone like DigixDAO is there. I think MakerDAI is actually starting to enter Asia as well, with a pretty strong presence.
there's probably some people from the OmiseGo community either here or watching this. Maybe you talk a little bit about the the roadmap, or when I know my understanding is that you guys are implementing a Plasmachain. Maybe talk a little bit about when we could expect more on the product side.
As soon as we launch it.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're working really hard. The roadmap came out last week, I believe, and so the whole idea of how the roadmap is designed is we'll introduce kind of the first version, right, MVP Plasma type of version, and then it'll slowly get more and more complex, and we'll add it on. So we wanted something to the market as soon as we can. And the wallet SDK itself is already out. And I think we have right now we have about 3 kind of large conglomerates in Asia that's implementing it.
Zhuling, maybe you could talk a little bit about either Aelf and what's on the roadmap there, and other projects that you're particularly excited about.
Yeah, so for Aelf, we're always trying to test new things in the field. Last year we did a private token sale, and actually we also claimed our reg D to SEC, because we do think being compliant is really important in this industry. Right now we're working on our tech platform. Our testbed will be ready in 2 months, and we'll start to ensure the security side and also the usability, and adding some new features. We will launch our mainnet towards the end of this year. That's where we'll start to see some D apps running on our network. Right now I'm more focusing on how to build an ecosystem for the future. I personally think just putting money in new projects probably is not the most efficient way to do it. I do think in order to find the best D apps, we need 3 layers. We need the smart capital to put into those projects. We also need business model experts to really help them out, to think through how exactly a D app would work from an economic point of view, from a business point of view. And from the tech side, we will be one of the helpers, and we also welcome other guys to come in. That's why 2 weeks ago we launched a Aelf Innovation Alliance, trying to invite all the leading players in this field and also consulting firms for the traditional world, so that we work on education and awareness for now. And towards the second half of the year, that's where we want to do some incubation and exploration to really demonstrate some successful use cases. And my belief here is that probably some of the D apps will be more localized. We're looking at gaming, we're looking at payment systems. A lot of use cases can be done, and it depends on which country it would be.
On that point, and you mentioned something interesting earlier, which is that these projects are fundamentally global, and so even though you're starting in Asia, you need to be building for a global user base. But I think there's a lot of projects out there that market themselves as the Ethereum of China, right, Neo, or the Ethereum of Korea, or things like that. How do you guys feel about those projects? Do you think we could see a world where there's many different dApp platforms that are kind of exist in different regions, or do you think it's likely that kind of long term there will be one that's interoperable? You guys must have some thoughts on there. What do you think of Neo? It would be one question, or a lot of these projects that are marketing themselves like that.
Well, like for me, I always look at what they're building, right? Like what's the fundamentals of those projects, right? Whether it makes sense or not, right? And also a lot of projects claim themselves as local Ethereum, or even local OmiseGo, right? So. Yeah, OmiseGo Classic. Yeah, totally. So, I think in terms of user base, that makes sense, right? But eventually they're gonna compete with the other blockchains, right? Because I think blockchain is broadly, but at the early stage, right? It's good that you start from somewhere, and it doesn't make sense for Asia projects, right? Spend a lot of time United States where they don't understand, they don't know what's going on, right? So, yeah, that's my thinking.
I can also add something. So, I think regarding that question of like the Serum of China or that, I think just that really popped out more because I think back in the days there just weren't a lot of development material in Chinese, and obviously that meant that you could have basically started an Ethereum version that is more targeted towards Chinese developers or Korean developers and all that. But in general, I think nowadays it's more about the community development. Like Neo, for example, like we're investors, so we're slightly more practical on things, right? So I think that the larger the community, the less risk for us, right? So that's how we see things, and I think Neo right now has definitely become one of the top communities in the world, and so obviously working with them, then your investments are slightly lower risk, and they can leverage a lot of existing resources there.
Can I just add like really quick? I know the time is running up. So I think end of the day, this is kind of like branding and your value. No matter you go global or you go local, just live to your value. Just be true to that. I mean, the reason that we decided to stay global is, I mean, practically, okay, this is a regulatory hedging. You never know, what's going to happen in terms of the regulatory side. We want to be, having the flexibility over there. And also, this is a nascent industry that community, you need to grab the best guys. And we don't want to limit ourselves in certain markets. So that's the thoughts here.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, guys.